All right, so we have known for a long time now that there was going to be some sort of fight regarding this $3.5 trillion infrastructure plan. And basically, with the strategy that Nancy Pelosi laid out with this dual track process, you have the bipartisan one that they're working with Republicans on for God knows what reason. But we do know what reason. It's because they're corrupt. But then you also have the partisan version. That's the $3.5 trillion larger, more social program based infrastructure plan. And these are basically at competition right now because you have corporate Democrats, corrupt Democrats who are coming and trying to take this fight on with the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And basically, they're at a stalemate right now, especially considering this next update that we have. So here from Jake Johnson of Common Dreams, here are the 9 right-wing Democrats threatening to tank their party's $3.5 trillion agenda. So basically, again, we have this dual track process that is going on. You have the Congressional Progressive Caucus, including the squad members like AOC, Cori Bush, Ilhan Omar, etc., who are basically saying, we're not going to allow you to pass this bipartisan one, which is the really shitty, watered down one. That's a giant privatization scheme. But they're saying, we're not going to let you pass that in and of itself unless it is attached to the larger, more substantial $3.5 trillion one. And so then on the other hand, you also have these corporate Democrats, specifically these 9 right-wing Democrats that they're talking about in this piece, that are also coming to the table and saying, well, we're not going to vote on the budget resolution for the $3.5 trillion bill unless you first pass as a standalone bill the bipartisan one. So this is a stalemate that we have right now. It's entirely possible that both of these dual track infrastructure pieces could be entirely blown up if this isn't able to be resolved. So let's go ahead and read some of the details here, and then I'm going to tell you what strategy the Congressional Progressive Caucus should be sticking to in this entire fight. So here from Jake Johnson again. A group of 9 conservative House Democrats on Friday threatened to torpedo a $3.5 trillion budget resolution, the cornerstone of their party's social spending and climate agenda, unless Speaker Nancy Pelosi first allows a vote on a $550 billion bipartisan infrastructure bill that has been criticized as inadequate and potentially harmful to the environment. And what he means there by potentially harmful to the environment is that there are a lot of provisions that extend our usage of fossil fuels. There are a lot of provisions that protect a lot of these fossil fuel companies. There are also some that are privatization schemes, as I was saying, where we basically sell off a lot of our older infrastructure to private corporations who will then turn around and probably price gouge the American people. So it's not a great bill in and of itself. So that's why you would have to keep it attached to this $3.5 trillion one. But in a letter to Pelosi, Democratic representatives, so here are the guilty parties, Josh Gottenheimer of New Jersey, Carolyn Bordeaux of Georgia, Philemon Vela of Texas, Henry Cuellar of Texas, Ed Case of Hawaii, Kurt Schrader of Oregon, Jared Golden of Maine, Vicente Gonzalez of Texas, and Jim Costa of California warned that they, quote, will not consider voting for a budget resolution until the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is that smaller one, passes the House and is signed into law. And they continue, quote, with the livelihoods of hardworking American families at stake, we simply can't afford months of unnecessary delays and risk squandering this once-in-a-century bipartisan infrastructure package, the letter reads. Quote, it's time to get shovels in the ground and people to work. So, first of all, this is all you need to know right here. This once-in-a-century investment, these corporate Democrats who are taking bribes from the fossil fuel companies to go and do what they're doing right now, these corporate Democrats believe that $550 billion is a once-in-a-century investment into our infrastructure. So these are the same corporate Democrats who would then turn around and vote for, and have voted for, billion-dollar increases to our military budget that as of right now stands anywhere between, again, because the Pentagon can't pass an audit, stands anywhere between $750 billion to $1 trillion. So the same people who are funding a $750 billion per year military budget are trying to convince you that $550 billion, a lower number, is enough for a once-in-a-century investment into our infrastructure. That is how pathetic and weak this proposal actually is, and what their mindset actually is. This is a joke. It's an embarrassment. If you genuinely believe that $550 billion is enough to spend on our infrastructure, I mean, these are the same people who are trying to ramp up a new Cold War with China. Well, you want to look at what China is doing and why they're starting to beat us economically? They're investing trillions of dollars into their infrastructure because they recognize that that improves efficiency, creates jobs, and expands economic sectors. You don't want to get fucked by China economically. Maybe, I don't know, invest in improving our infrastructure domestically instead of just destroying infrastructure overseas via our military. These people are a complete joke. They're an embarrassment. But this is the line that they are trying to push, and this is the position they're trying to put Pelosi in right now. And again, these are the 9 Democrats here. If you want to go call their offices or, I don't know, talk to them, harass them, call them. Don't harass them, but, give them a strongly worded phone call or email if you want to. But here's a good take that I think summarizes it well. In what world is it moderate, because we know the media always frames these corporate corrupt Democrats as moderate, in what world is it moderate to kill a $3.5 trillion agenda against the majority of your own party? It's far-right austerity. It's Mitch McConnell's wet dream and a disruptive in the extreme, but they get the, quote, moderate label because political press are complicit in providing them cover. So he's absolutely 100% correct here. We got Manu Raju, a CNN reporter here, and yes, he is running cover for them. And yes, all of these other corporate outlets are also running cover for these so-called moderates. They're not moderates, they're just corrupt, right? When you're talking about Joe Manchin and why he opposes some of the climate legislation in this bill, it's not because he's moderate. It's not because he's representing the will of the West Virginian people who desperately need infrastructure investments. It's because of none of that. It's simply because he's corrupt. It's because he's taking those weekly phone calls with ExxonMobil, who are then telling him to go water down climate legislation. These people, including these 9 House Democrats, are not moderates by any stretch of the imagination. So we can't allow these corporate outlets to continue framing it in this way. It's absolutely absurd. This is far-right austerity, as Zach is pointing out there, and he's 100% correct. And so what is the solution right now? What is this fight going to culminate in, basically? Well, this is what the Congressional Progressive Caucus has to stick to if we're going to win this fight. So they say, Congressional Progressive Caucus survey shows majority of respondents will withhold support of bipartisan infrastructure bill without reconciliation package. So what does this basically mean? Well, what this basically means is we have a showdown that is happening right now between 9 corporate Democrats in the House, 9 of them, and then a handful of them in the Senate, like Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, and the rest of them. We have a showdown right now between 9 House Democrats and dozens of members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. That's what's happening right now. We have a fight where you have the entirety of the squad, as well as even more mild politicians, you could say, within the Congressional Progressive Caucus, that are coming up against head-to-head with these 9 corporate Democrats. So it's a complete showdown right now. And all they have to do in order to win this fight is go out there, stick to their guns, stick to the original plan, because remember, this dual-track process is what even Nancy Pelosi promised to do from the beginning. Say, we're going to stick to this process. We're not going to feed into these corrupt corporate right-wing Democrats who are trying to help the Republican Party by destroying this extremely popular infrastructure plan. We are not going to allow them to tank this bill. This bill is what Joe Biden ran on. This bill is overwhelmingly supported by the American people. This bill is desperately needed funding towards some of these programs that the American people want you to put money towards. So this is not a fight that they can afford to lose, okay? If they lose this fight, it's because they didn't try. All right, this is a completely 100% winnable fight for the Congressional Progressive Caucus if they are able to keep this core group of dozens of House members who they say they have on board for this plan. If they can keep that group together and defeat these 9 corporate Democrats, then this will be an absolutely massive show of force. And all they have to do, again, is keep that cohesive bloc together and simply refuse to vote for the bipartisan bill until and unless this partisan $3.5 trillion one is passed directly in tandem and sent to Joe Biden's desk at the same exact time. Okay, that's the only acceptable situation. And honestly, I'm confused why so many people are already giving in to a lot of these corporate Democrats in terms of the framing of this issue of, oh, we're going to need to water it down, and oh, it might end up being less than 3.5 trillion. Why? You have as much power as they have right now in this moment. They desperately want that bipartisan win. So don't give it to them unless they fully meet your demands, okay? That the partisan version has a bunch of concessions to Republicans, has a bunch of concessions to corporate America and the fossil fuel industry. So let's get a win on the other side equally, if not more so, in the opposite direction. Because again, you're not negotiating with moderates here. You're negotiating with ExxonMobil.